And Colin, I suppose if I could start with you, if you don't mind, because we've heard a few different phrases today, and I just want to get a bit of clarification. What are we talking about when we say cyber resilience alongside cyber security? Can you distinguish those?
Yeah, so appreciate I'm in a room full of people that intimately know these things. So on a starting level, the NIST framework is the most useful way to answer the question. So we're over on the left-hand side in the recover side. So whilst there's a lot of investment and things going on across protect, detect, identify, all of those things, which is so hard. On the left-hand side, where we get to the recover part, there's a lot of kind of assumptions made. So where the risk profile is probably very well known across the rest of the areas in this framework, we're on the other side going, there's still risks. So people that have infrastructure, recovery infrastructure, copies of data to come back to, all the analyst coverage is talking about, now you need to go to your backups. And there's an assumption there that there is backups.
Yeah.
There is something you've configured as a fail-safe for your business if the worst case happens over here. So what we're doing is trying to talk about that risk profile, extending across and understanding how those risks and things like the major attack vectors, all that, how that's coming in on your data and how we can mitigate against that. So that's where we start the conversation. And it's a myth busting, and it's getting through those assumptions really.
Yeah, we touched upon this in one of the earlier panels that, it's great to have a to-do list in terms of education and prevention. It's great to have a to-do list when whatever hits the fan. But it's the knowing what to do when the stuff has hit the fan and now you need to take email addresses either somewhere, like you need to have systems in place that can be executed.
Yeah.
How important is it to have role playing of stuff like that alongside the prevention side?
There's the human factor. I spoke to someone there. The human factor for me is something that's very close. Like we architect solutions, but at the end of the day, when the attack happens, it's all about where did the attack come in? Who is responsible for keeping that out? So it's the witch hunting. So what we're trying to do is on that side of it, post-attack, right a boom, whatever way you want to say it, is do you have something that's solid ground? And we start at the data level. So we talked about all the variance comes in and you wouldn't know where to be turning. But when you look at the attack vectors of how your data can be compromised, that's actually quite a relatively static area. So if we know about those attack vectors of how our data is getting compromised, and we can mitigate against that and do intelligence on the data in a cordoned off area, then that's going to really help with the recovery side as well. So we're trying to give that solid ground to a vast area, which is very hard to establish that solid ground.
And Jennifer, everyone in this room will probably know they're the ones who'll be doing the heavy liftings if something like this was to ever happen. But it is important that your team and the people around you and the third parties that you engage with are all on, if not the same page, the same chapter of the book to try and get through it.
Absolutely. We talk about business continuity, I know it was spoken about earlier in some detail, but when you're making a business continuity plan, you have to be realistic about worst case scenarios. There's no point in just thinking about what if I lose one server, or what if one laptop or one email address is targeted and exposed. You need to actually think about, if everything went down, what do I do? And you need to assign a budget to these things. That's a big problem that I'm seeing across the industry, is that when your cybersecurity team is quiet, then people go, okay, we'll pull some budget from the cybersecurity team because they're quiet, they don't need budget. They're quiet because the budget that you've given them is working. The job that they're doing is great. If you're hearing stuff from your cybersecurity team where things are going wrong, it's usually down to lack of resources and lack of budget. So you need to assign a budget for this failover process. And then to have business continuity, you need to decide what's the absolute minimum that we can cope with if everything goes down. So can we cope with one single user in each part of the business that now has access to a failover laptop? Do I need to buy 300 laptops and have them for everybody? That's not realistic. You need to roll it down to the very bare minimum that you need to keep your business going. And if you have those kind of practices in place, it's the same thing as my mother always says, save money. If you save money, you'll never need to use that money because you've saved it. So if you have a plan in place for the absolute worst case scenario, then you probably won't ever have to use that plan. But even with all those best practices in place, the discover, assess, prioritize, remediate, and then measure, even all those in place, you still, if you have all of those perfectly tuned and you're doing everything absolutely as it should be done by the book, you still have to assume that you're going to be attacked. Always assume that you're going to be exposed at some point. That's where the problem is, when people assume it won't happen to me because all of these things are covered perfectly.
Yeah, I was talking to someone earlier on, and they were saying that like they're delighted to be here and they're delighted events like this happen, because a few years ago there was the notion that cyber attacks happened in America and they happened in the newspapers, but they didn't really happen here. And as we've heard all day, that's not the case at all. Joel, I'm wondering, work has changed dramatically. We all know it changed overnight when COVID hit and we were all sent into lockdown. A lot of people were forced to work from their own devices, accessing data, accessing systems and servers from their own devices, because some companies realistically just didn't have either the funds or the resources to make that happen. How much of a threat is the individual device, and should your lockdown procedure change if individuals' devices are used versus company computers?
Thanks very much. That's a very good question. And that also brings us to the question of, brings us to a problem that a lot of companies are going to face over the next couple of years, which is what's the legality behind, taking a personal computer or a BYOD system when it comes to incident response or when you need to investigate. And we saw it over, during COVID, where a lot of companies had to come up with very fast methods to enable remote work and procedures that did not exist in the past. And there was also, a massive move to the cloud, an attempt to move to the cloud during that, that very short period and space. And so that's one key problem that a lot of organizations are going to face, probably over the next couple of years, really, which is what's that soft spot, especially when BYOD is concerned? What's that soft spot in terms of legality? Can we actually request a personal computer, to actually get investigated in the case of an incident response, or are we just not going to be able to have, accessibility towards that? But generally speaking, just back down to your question there, it's still going to constitute a massive problem anyway, regardless. And most organizations till today try to push BYOD as far away as possible. A couple of years back, it was acceptable to a large extent, but a lot of organizations, what we see now is people are either enabling some sort of direct connect, pretty much, or enabling like VPN everywhere, or, just things that still allow organizations to keep control in case they need to pull an off switch at some point, or they need to enforce their policies and their procedures and things like that. So yeah, it's just that very sweet spot that we're still going to see, and a lot of research and a lot of papers have actually been written just discussing this very concept in its own self. The concept of at what point or at what stage what does that barrier begin to exist when BYOD itself is concerned.
Yeah, and it comes back to that point that Jennifer just made about investment and money and ensuring that the right money is going into the right places at the right time. Pat, I want to bring you in here now because you're the person, as lovely as you are, nobody ever wants to talk to you or members of your team.
Thanks very much.
Just saying. So the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau alongside the National Cybercrime Centre are sort of the two big bodies when it comes to cyber attacks and cyber threats. Before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, can you just tell me about the types of cyber crimes that are brought to you? We've heard a few times today about phishing, we've heard the ransomware attack, we've heard, there's a whole suite of types of attack. Do they all land on your desk, or are they sort of sectored off into different parts of Garda Síochána?
Yeah, I suppose, just from the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau's perspective, we very much deal with the cyber-dependent type of crimes. These are your typical ransomware attacks, DDoS attacks. Your cyber-enabled type crimes would be your traditional types of crime, which would be facilitated through the use of ICT equipment. But if I could just go back, I suppose, one important point that I'd like to make, I suppose, is at the end of the day, anybody can be a victim of a cybercrime. And, it can happen to the best of us. It can be a very traumatic event, and when these things do happen, because we get the reports in at the Cybercrime Bureau, and we can tell when we're talking to the IT security managers or whatever, it really can be, I won't say a lonely place, but it can be a lot of unknowns. And this is why I suppose the whole idea of creating that awareness about being prepared is really, really, really important. And I can't emphasize that. You really need to know, what to do in the event that something is going to happen. And as I said, it can happen to the best of us. We're all only human at the end of the day. You can put the best systems and controls in place, and we do that. It's probably no different than, protecting your house, wherever you put the best locks on your doors and alarms. But at the end of the day, things do happen. And this is where you need to be able to respond. You need to be prepared, and you need to know what to do. And I might talk a little bit more about that in a minute, Jess, about where we would fit into that scenario as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great one to kind of probe into further, because I'm sure every organisation and everybody here will have internal systems in place. So if this, then that, that's what happens in those scenarios. But when it comes to tagging in on Garda Síochána, how much info is too much info to be sharing with you guys? We heard on one of the earlier panels that they accumulate in the Irish Prison Service a list of the near misses. Is that data beneficial, so you get an understanding of the types of threats that are out there and what's being caught, to inform, I suppose, the nature of the threats that are going on in the world?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, at the end of the day, we're there to provide advice, support and assistance to victims of cybercrime. We also have a preventative role as well, crime prevention role, and we work very closely with, as you mentioned earlier, the National Cybersecurity Centre, and indeed all our stakeholders when it comes to cybercrime prevention. This month is EU Cybersecurity Month, and again, we took the lead on that with the National Cybersecurity Centre. So I suppose there's a big message there around, awareness of cyber incidents and what the trends are out there. But I suppose one of the big issues that we still see, and it's not just in Ireland, is the underreporting of cybercrime. Why do I ask that people and companies report cybercrime? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. I suppose first and foremost, as I said earlier, we're there to assist and advise and support victims of cybercrime. And we fully understand, I suppose, that the primary objective in the first instance, regardless of what the incident is business continuity, recovery of systems. So that can be a challenge. But we, as I said, we have the officers at the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau have vast experience in dealing with these situations. So if you need assistance or advice, call us, contact us. We're more than happy to help where we can. But I suppose by reporting as well, I want to just, assure the audience as well, we will fully investigate any reported cyber incidents or cyber crimes to us. We will deal with you on the utmost confidentiality. But I suppose reporting to us also helps us to understand what's actually happening within the cybercrime landscape within Ireland. It allows us then to take steps towards understanding the threat actors, how they operate, to understand, I suppose, what steps we need to put in place. But also it allows us to advise where we can others to prevent them from being victims of the same type of crime.
Mm-hmm. And Colin, to go back to you on this point, because we sort of heard it quite a bit now this morning so far about the planning side of things and the need for a plan and so on. How important is it to test your plan, as in look for holes and almost hack the plan to see if a very intelligent, very sophisticated actor comes in, maybe your beautifully laminated plan won't hold water?
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, and I'd fall foul of the kind of same commentary that's going on of oversimplification on that side. So test, but there's so many different layers, it's so difficult, it's so complicated. So, we have a solid ground where we have actually data to ingest back into our business to get it back up and running. But the biggest thing I'm finding is that actually what is normal after an event isn't talked about enough. What systems do you bring up? In the first 24 hours after a bad enough attack, what systems do you bring up? And to be honest, in an incident response plan, even that base target setting isn't done enough in organisations. And like we're talking to people in Sheltered Harbour, I was talking to the president of Sheltered Harbour, exchanging messages with him. Sorry, I don't know him personally. In the US, you know, that are a non-profit organisation built to try to breed confidence back into the US financial system, but they're having kind of impact across industry and other countries as well. But you know, the most important thing he said was that, you know, of all the regulators, of all the, you know, in the US, they're all trying to jump on the initiative. The non-profit organisations, the people are collaborating and sharing important information. Everyone's trying to, the regulators are actually even trying to jump on them going, give us a solution. You know, give us something we can recover from. But he's saying to them, and you know, he referenced last night, it was so interesting, all the documents that have been produced by different regulations in different countries, and sometimes they name check someone to say they have a solution, Sheltered Harbour solution, and he's like pushing back on them. He's saying, no, don't. We don't have the solution. We just have to have guiding principles around what people should expect and what they should aim for in a recovery scenario where the worst case happens. So for me, the testing process is made up of all the widgets, all the infrastructure pieces, all the stakeholders from the different applications, but it's about actually what do we do in that first 24 hours? What do we do into the second 48 hours? Because we're going to face a situation that isn't normal to us. So it's trying to bring all those pieces in together. And it's very idealistic to say that, but we still have to do it because those things can happen. And you'd be surprised. So he's pushing back. He's saying, please don't name check us. We're just guiding principles that people can hopefully bring in to go, what do I bring up? Do I bring up my funds access? Do I bring up my account access balances for financial customers? That's what they're trying to aim low, actually. And you know, people go, well, we talk about solid ground, right? And the copies of data we can bring back into those recovery operations. Those copies of data aren't the live view of your data of when the attack happened. You're going to lose transactions. So people even have to kind of make peace with that concept. They have to get something back up that's going to keep their reputation of their company intact. And then they're going to have to remediate the other stuff in between. Yeah. So that has to all come together into that plan. So that's what we talk about. And we try to augment some really, really good stuff they're doing already in their businesses.
And Jennifer, this is the important point because, you know, again, touch wood, cross fingers and all the rest, it doesn't happen to anyone in this room. But if and when it does happen, and you are, you know, in charge of cybersecurity or IT in your organisation, you're going to have a lot of conflicting priorities. So there'll be the reputational side, there'll be the looking after the customer side, there'll be looking after the staff side, there'll be making sure that, like, the list goes on and on and on. I suppose it comes down to the personalities involved in terms of the internal company structure as to who makes the calls, is it, when it comes to what, like, in that scenario, I suppose, when you're trying to distinguish what goes back online when, what's the level of risk, what's the level of benefit, does it come down to having sort of...
So there's usually someone that the book stops with when it comes to that. Whether it's a company that has 4 employees or 4,000 employees, everybody has to have some kind of practice in place. But it's important to consider your legal obligations as well. If you've been exposed and you have access to GDPR data, you need to report that. The companies that seem to respond the best, or should I say recover the best, it's not just the practices of bringing up the data, it's also their transparency when it comes to media and comes to their customers, their clients, anyone that's using their systems and their data as well. Transparency is key. And people are, and when I say people, I mean people as in the companies, people and the individuals, people are often really embarrassed to admit that they've been exposed. But if you think about it, all of us at some point either know an individual or know a company that has been, you know, exposed in some way, shape or form. So there's nothing to be embarrassed about admitting it. And in fact, admitting it is the very first step, I would say, and then get your everything else in place. Because if you're hiding, if you're making the efforts to hide the exposure that you're suffering from, then you're also fighting back all of those questions whilst trying to deal with the situation as well. And if you look at some, I know one of my favorite use cases for that particular argument is Norsk Hydro. It's about 3 years ago, I think, where they were exposed, and they went back to pen and paper and they made it very clear to everybody straight from day one what had happened. All of their processing went down, they lost millions, but the way that they reacted to it, so if you don't know that, look it up, Google it, check out the YouTube videos, because That to me is the most fantastic way to respond to something, to accept responsibility, to do what you have to get it up and running, but to make sure that everybody has transparency about the actions that are happening at the time. And the secrecy tends to make it much more complicated. But when it comes to, whoever the book lands with, there's going to be somebody in every company, and there's going to be somebody who's going to argue with that somebody in every company that the thing that they're deciding to do is the wrong thing to do. But when you put somebody in that position and you give them that responsibility, you need to step back and allow them to make those decisions. There's a reason you put them there.
Yeah.
And you need to, most importantly, know who that person is that makes those decisions when the time comes. Like say, whether it's a 4-person company or a 4,000-person company, everybody needs to know where that book stops.
You alluded to something there, Jill, that I want to pick up with you, and Pat referenced it as well, in relation to the underreporting and this sense of shame or the fear of reputational damage from a ransomware attack or a cyber attack or a phishing attempt, whatever it is. Do you think we're moving past that now? And because Ireland is so strong in terms of cybersecurity, that there's an understanding within the cybersecurity industry that, look, it's not ideal, it's not going to be the best day you have at work, but it's the right thing to do from an insights point of view, so for the Garda and the National Cybercrime Bureau, but also you might get insights from others who've gone through something similar if you open up about it and if you seek that help that is readily available.
Yeah, I mean, I would wish everyone was that happy and admittive when it comes to ransomware, but unfortunately, no. It's more of an acceptable news now, indeed, to a very large extent. It wouldn't shock a lot of people. It wouldn't be something that is too, unexpected. For example, when the HSE hack happened, when you told someone that HSE had just been hacked, the response was not really. It wasn't really, oh no, how did that happen? It was just more of a terrible inconvenience, And when we look at the rate at which, organizations get hacked, ransomed on a monthly basis even, just the number of those who actually report, it's quite high enough. And a lot of companies actually just pay the ransom and just don't bother, try to cover things under the books. So from an acceptability perspective, a lot of companies have adopted it's not about if, it's about when approach, to a very large extent. But then a lot of boards and organizational C-suite executives would still, they'll call you into the room and ask you, are we going to get hacked? And most of the time, the cybersecurity specialists they wouldn't want to give an answer. They want to dance around the question a bit, But at the end of the day, no one still wants to sit down and hear, there's a potential that we are going to come in one day and everywhere is red and we can't, do anything. So to a very large extent, in terms of acceptability, there is a massive presence, especially in the Republic of Ireland after the HSE hack that happened. There's a massive presence around board members on the importance of, cybersecurity, and it's really swept a lot of organizations, risk registers, and got to the very top after that very hack. But from an acceptability perspective, a lot of people they're still a bit reluctant and still don't want to get, that kind of news at the end of the day, regardless.
Pat, I want to bring you back in though, because I know that the Garda have done quite a bit of work in terms of training and educating officers in stations around the country, for example, in terms of the first line of response when a cyber attack is reported. How important is that so that, if a cyber crime is reported, it's not blown out of proportion, but it's also not dismissed? Getting that tone right and that understanding, I would imagine, is very important.
Yeah, no, it is indeed. I suppose what I'd also like to stress is, the value we can add to go back to my point earlier around the recovery and that being the priority. Again, I suppose from our perspective, I suppose, cybercrime has no borders, as we all know. It's very much, as we consider, a transnational type of cyber crime. And I suppose we have that outreach we have with our law enforcement partners throughout the globe. And if something is reported, of course, we all want to know the who, what, when and how. And I think that can also help with the recovery process when, an incident occurs. And having that outreach, as I says, we're able to share, I suppose, those, indicators of compromise, the malware samples. We can send them off to Europol, we can get them analysed. So we can start to understand what happened. And I think as part of any recovery process, that's very, very important, is to know what happened and make sure that that gap is basically closed. There's no point bringing systems back up again and all of a sudden there's still an issue. And you know, so understanding what happened, I think is key, and that's what you learn from. So that's what you build into your, you know, your plans going forward. And there, that's the sort of, you know, information that needs to be shared, so everyone fully understands. So the reporting element, just going back to it, I can't overemphasize, as I said, it really, really is important. As I said, the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau, we're there to help, assist and advise when something does go wrong. So I think an important message for me is that help is available when something does go wrong.
Yeah, and I think that is something that we all kind of need to remind ourselves, because I think when you're faced with a challenge, you may have that, oh my God moment, but it is worth just being the cool head. An interesting question here, Jennifer, I might put it to you. It's coming in on Slido. A quick reminder that you can ask questions, sli.do, and pop it in. How do you manage your reputation as an organisation and begin to rebuild trust after a cyber incident? Is it enough to communicate that incident? It's a good question.
Absolutely. That's where transparency, and I can't mention that use case for North enough. Once you're putting yourself out as being transparent and responsible for your own actions, you're taking responsibility for what's happened, you're letting people know what it is that you're going to do, and you're letting people know if their data has been affected. You know, once people feel like they're being told the truth, then that's where, you know, maintaining or damage limitation comes into it as such. If you find out about an attack and it's 3 months later, you're going to feel pretty hard done by if you're a user of that service or a user of that business, and it's very hard to rebuild trust after that. I mean, sometimes it can happen that people aren't aware of an attack until a significant amount of time. That's different. If you're aware of it, you've been attacked and you've restored data and you've brought everything back up and running and it gets leaked later, that's absolutely the worst approach for both your business and for the people even that work for your business, for their trust in your capability to do the right thing. But if you can do both of those things together, be transparent with all of the users of your services and the people that do business with you, whilst putting all of the practical solutions into play, that's the best way to limit the damage. And I really think that, and this is a me opinion as opposed to a statistic, that can limit your damage down to like single digit percentages as such from there, because people will trust you if you're transparent.
I think it comes back to accountability, doesn't it? Just like everything else. I think if you put your hands up and say, look, this happened, people will obviously not be delighted, but they'll respect that you owned it, and then they'll trust that you'll come back again and say if and when something happened again. So it does come back to that point of accountability. Unfortunately, we are up against the clock, but I just want to say a huge thank you to our panel.